developing games today is a lot more accessible than it was 15 years ago. Game development engines made great strides in becoming not only available for the general public to use without the need of an upfront cost, but also in being widely documented, providing features to simplify certain development processes on top of all the resources available from other creators that can easily be accessed through something like YouTube, where people not only will teach you how to develop for the engine you are using, but also many people that will delve into the intricacies of game design, dissecting and essaying about what makes games tick. Indeed, back then, indie games were still going through their big break on the Xbox 360 and were starting to become a mainstay in gaming libraries worldwide. However, there were some game engines used at that time that were widely spread among solo developers, especially among those that didn't have a programming background, that just wanted to put their ideas into the computer screen. One of the most well-known of these engines being RPG Maker. RPG Maker makes it possible for people with little knowledge of programming to make games without much effort. Heck, a child could make a game in RPG Maker. In fact, I've dabbled into making some myself when I was younger, and it really is that simple. This also applies for artists that want to make something else with their art, which seems to be the case for something like Omori before it ballooned into the massive project it turned out to be. This, in turn, allows these very artists to create some of the most unexpected and creative products, with the most well-known example of it being Yumeniki. If you want to see a video about this game, then hit the subscribe button. It's gonna come later down the line. Today, we'll be talking about one of the best examples of how RPG Maker made it possible for a person that goes by the name Kouri to create a marvelous experience in ib. ib is an RPG Maker 2000 horror game published in 2012 that tells the story of Ib, a 9-year-old girl that goes to a museum exposition with her parents and ends up getting abducted to a bizarro version of this museum after stopping to view one of its paintings. This parallel world is full of malice and is very hostile, with the paintings coming to life and trying to hurt her. In this world, however, someone's life force is directly tied to a rose they carry, and she needs to make sure that this rose stays safe. In her efforts to escape this dangerous place she finds herself in, she rescues the rose of a barely alive man she encounters in her path called Gary. In a bid to keep Ib safe and find the exit, Gary stays together with Ib, and they, together, have to solve a variety of puzzles and face a plethora of situations that will test their mettle while kindling a friendship between the two. One thing I love about these RPG Maker games is how they just kind of use the engine to do whatever they please and throw the concept of RPG out the window. Combat? Why do I need that? I'll just make a horror puzzle game. It's just very endearing to me. Ib is a great game because it tells a very simple story while also making great characters along the way. I'll try my best not to spoil anything when trying to explain why. To begin with, this is one of those games with multiple endings. Ib doesn't have any spoken lines apart from what you choose during certain dialogue options. These will affect what kind of ending you get, but are not the only thing dictating what leads you to a certain ending, as your actions during your playthrough also make a difference, making it so it isn't just how you interact with the cast that defines an ending you get, but also your interactions with the entire world and how you decide to treat things. This world that Ib and Gary get abducted to has a certain rule to it, which dictates that a painting from this world can only leave to the real world in an exchange of lives. In other words, Someone from the real world has to die here for a painting to leave to the real world. And we get to see how the main antagonist of this game has this wish of seeing the real world and meeting all the people out there, but is not able to because no one from outside comes in. You even get to find some notes about how they feel about this, and it's honestly a bit sad, making you feel empathy even towards someone that has the goal of leaving you to die here. Of course, there also is the relationship you get to see developing between Ib and Gary. Gary is kind of a scaredy cat and is mainly putting up a front for Ib so he can seem like this great adult that will protect her from anything. But we get to see that Ib displays more courage than he does a lot of the time, despite her age. But it is also quite clear that both of them cannot get through without the help of each other. Not only that, but Gary is also quite rash and short-tempered, lashing out against the bizarre things that happen in his world, and Ib is the one that has to talk him out of doing things he might regret later on. Through the progression of the story, Gary warms up to Ib, and their friendship starts to flourish as they find their way to an exit. He helps Ib out on things that require strength and even reads words that she doesn't know yet, while she keeps him company and faces things head on. When making your way through the game, you'll see many things that will be up to interpretation, one of them being, why is there a painting of Ib's parents here? It never really is explained, and the most you can do is cook up conjectures of what any of that could possibly mean, which is honestly quite fitting with the thematic of the game being around paintings and art. Yeah, a lot of games like this one also have this open-ended characteristic to them, but trying to interpret these things is part of the fun. Oh, right, how could I forget? Ib also has quite the proper ambience for a horror game. A lot of the soundtrack is drony and dreary, and some of the visuals are quite impactful and gory. I wouldn't say it's scary, but it certainly can put you on edge with this combination of elements, and there are certain moments that can be quite intense with having to run away from some things. So it's the perfect game for people that are into horror, but are more in the sensitive side of things, especially when taking the remake into consideration. Yup, Ib has a remake that was released back in 2022, made in RPG Maker MV, that has support for release in consoles, and it changes quite a bit compared to the original game. The story still is the same, but the changes are mainly focused on the fine details on how to reach the various different endings and the puzzles you find throughout the game. Apart from the obvious higher quality sprites and visuals, and that is to the benefit of the game. The puzzles are much better. They tend to flow a lot nicer and are more engaging, with the first obvious example being the sequence to acquire the apple in the yellow area. In the original game, you had to interact with certain things to get numbers to be able to solve a math problem that was a log to a door, which is just kind of silly and terrible to the flow because people don't like math. The remake changes it, so you have to find these wind-up saplings to make the tree grow, and then you feed the apple to the mouth. Apart from changes to rooms and how they flow, the changes to requirements for the endings are also much better. First, it has been made easier to get all the different endings now, since the save system knows your progression regardless of the save slot you're using, but also it isn't basically up to chance to know what you need to do for each ending. The requirements can be more easily deduced from the mechanics you have available to you, with one of them being able to talk to Gary whenever. Right, this reminds me, the remake is also a lot better because you can interact with more things. There is a lot more flavor text compared to the original game, and this gives a little bit more characterization to Ib, as we can think that these are her thoughts on something. but this also applies to interactions that we can have with Gary. So, if you were to pick between versions to play, I would certainly suggest you do it with the remake, as not only is it better, but you'd also be supporting the creator that way. Though the original one still isn't bad. Ib is one of those games that took a lot of inspiration from Humaniki in a way of using RPG Maker as a platform for purposes beyond what it was designed for. It is also one of the pioneers in the genre to have multiple endings. I suppose that a lot of the charm of the game and why people remember it so fondly, other than the story and characters, comes from finding out what is necessary to get a different ending, in a bid to change the destiny of these characters we all love so much. Like I said previously, a lot of what happens in a game is up for interpretation. Some of these things aren't really relevant for the eventual resolution, but the game presents you with questions to think about without actually demanding an answer. There's this part after meeting Mary where the party enters a room filled with bunnies and a giant bunny painting in the middle. They stop to talk about the painting and Gary is freaked out for some reason, saying the whole room is unsettling, while Mary says they are cute and asks Zib what she thinks about them. You are given three choices between thinking that it also is cute, you want to pet them, and that you're not sure. This answer doesn't really change anything, but we get a small hint from a bookshelf nearby that says that if your mind suffers too much, you'll start to hallucinate and it'll split apart, yet you won't even be aware of it. Later on, when taking control of Gary, we get to see that room through his perspective, and it's completely different. It is quite unsettling indeed. Through many hints scattered throughout the many different corners of the game, we get to eventually interpret that this is, pretty much, Gary seeing the true colors of things as he is an adult. He gets to see things as they are, and Ib, while still being quite young and in quite a stressful situation, is either hallucinating from being put into the situation or is seeing the bunnies as a way to represent her childlike innocence. With this in mind, we get to wonder just how differently we see this alternative gallery compared to Gary, and just how much are we being shielded from its oppressiveness for being who we are. I want to briefly analyze this game's messages, but for that I will need to delve into some spoiler territory, so skip to this timestamp or jump to the next chapter to skip this section for the conclusion. One thing I take from this game, other than the messaging behind art being alive and being more than just what people directly see it as, is what it has to say about friendships. See, it's not just about Ib and Gary flourishing theirs during their time at the museum, but it also is a commentary on how one may be affected with having none. Mary is a clear example of that, being all alone in the museum, waiting for someone to come to even attempt having some sort of friendship with them, but also knowing that she needs to kill them in order to go to the real world and try to make even more friends. In fact, Mary lacks empathy towards the other two in many different moments in the game, not just because she has a clear goal in mind, but also because she never had the chance to develop this empathy. It also goes beyond that, as Mary is Gortana's last piece, and Gortana's relationship with his craft and how that affected his life could also open interpretations to many things. We get to know that Guertena had many people that appreciated his work, but no one seemed to really know much about the man himself. All knowledge of him was exclusive to his work, and it could perhaps be pointed out how he led a very solitary life. The pictures of the ladies could be a sign for longing of a relationship, and Mary, ultimately a representation of wanting a family. It is very possible that Guertena's feelings are demonstrated through how Mary acts, and it is very sad that she gets to live this reality. The game presents us with the two sides of companionship, the complete lack of it represented through Mary, and one that can have a bond so strong its memories can survive being wiped clean after leaving the parallel world of the fabricated museum. It honestly is a shame that we cannot have any ending where all three get to have a happy ending, but we can at least see they can live together in the art gallery the game provides. Ib is a small gem that has a cult following like none other. From the outside, it seems like a simple horror game that puts some frights in you and makes you hyper aware of paintings looking over your shoulder. But it ends up being more than that. It presents horror through the perspective of a child that has yet to learn much of the world. It displays everything in such an innocent way that it cannot help but make you question how you would see the presentations of an art gallery if you were a child yourself. Not only that, but it also shows that art can come to life. Most people tend to think that art is exclusively portrayed through static paintings hung up on walls, but Ib clearly states that art can also be presented through the form of a video game, and, in a way, come to life. I highly recommend you give Ib a chance. It's a charming game, and quite short too. Sure, you might want to play it more than once to get all the endings, but even then, that can be done quite quickly. And that's for the better, as you'll be given more time to change your perspective around many things in a game. I appreciate you coming all the way to the end of the video. I hope you give this game a chance if you haven't already, and if you have, let me hear your thoughts on Ib in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. We are trying to reach the 500 subscriber milestone, and your support is very welcome. Plus, if you feel like going a step beyond, you can also consider buying us a coffee at ko-fi.com/gameoverhell. Thanks for watching, and take care.